Welcome to this week's edition of Black Authors Matter TV, where we interview the latest movers and shakers in the African American literary community. You'll meet some old friends, discover new ones, and stay abreast of the latest book developments around the country and even the world. So sit back and relax for the next 2 hours with Black Authors Matter TV co-hosts Gwen Richardson and Dr. Rhonda Lawson.
Good evening and welcome to the last episode of Black Authors Matter TV for the month of April. I'm Gwen Richardson. I'm your host for tonight. And Rhonda, my co-host, will probably not be on. She had to go to a 6888 ceremony, which was really nice. And then her nephew is graduating. So she said if she could come on, she would, but it probably would be toward the end of the show. So we have a really good lineup for you tonight. One of our scheduled guests was unable to be on because of a health challenge. And so we're going to figure out how to work through that. And since Rhonda's not on, I have to do double duty, checking messages and the chat. So I appreciate you all's patience with that. But I should be what do you call it, a veteran by now after almost 5 years of doing this show. So anyway, we have our first guest, and before we bring her on, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. One is that the National Black Book Festival author vendor registration is at 75%. So if you want to participate, we expect to sell out soon. Very soon, like by the end of June at the probably the latest. So please don't procrastinate. We're at 75% sold. And then the final thing is today is the last day to vote for the Black Authors Matter TV Awards. And if you have some favorites in the 15 categories, midnight tonight is when 11:59 is when the voting ballot cuts off. We've had amazing participation. Almost 4,000 ballots have been cast so far, and we're excited about that. So we're bringing on our first guest now, and she has a very interesting topic. And I wonder if this is, let me see, sometimes this right here, I don't know what that is. Okay. Oh, yeah, it was a smudge or something. I thought it was something like a fly. I was like, what is that? Anyway, when you get on camera, then you see stuff. She has a very interesting book, and I forgot how I heard about the book. I think I was looking for something else. And you know how you on Amazon and similar titles come up? And I said, wow, this sounds interesting. And then I reached out to her. So her name is Katy. I'm not sure how to pronounce the middle name, Morlas, Shannon. And we want to welcome Katy to Black Authors Matter TV. And let me ask her to unmute so we can hear you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much
Okay.
for having me.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. And the interesting thing about Katy, when I reached out to her, because her book is called Invisible Blackness, and you have a copy of the book behind you, I think. Can you put it close to the
Yes, ma'am.
camera so people can see it? Is the subheading is a Louisiana family in the age of racial passing. So when I first saw the book, I thought it was a memoir. And so I reached out to Katy, and she let me know that she wasn't African American. And was that okay? I said, well, sure. I thought maybe it was a memoir about your family tree because, as you may know, among Black people, we come in all shades, from the darkest of the dark to the lightest of the light. So I thought maybe it was you tracing your family roots, but that wasn't the case. But you tell us what made you interested in this whole topic.
Well, it actually is a subject that is found in my own family tree, not my line directly, but in the prologue, or the introduction, I talk about the fact that my great grandmother, whom I knew very well, she didn't die until I was 15. She had a great grandfather who had a relationship with an enslaved woman. And this continued after the Civil War. So it lasted for several decades. He had his white family, of which my line is part, and then he had his black family just a few houses over. And they had the same last name and lived in the same small community. And I've reached out to other people on that family line, and we consider each other cousins, as is so often the case here in the New Orleans area. So it was in doing that research that I came to realize that anybody in the Louisiana area, particularly in the New Orleans area, South Louisiana, who can trace their family tree back for any length of time, generations, is going to find this story in their own family. Um, so that kind of led me on the journey to discovering more about it.
Oh, okay. Now you focus on a particular individual in the book, and tell us about her and her name.
Well, her name is Marguerite. And Marguerite was enslaved on a plantation that is known as Laura Plantation now. It's actually a tourist site. And she was the daughter of an enslaved housemaid there, a domestic, who was of mixed racial background. She was considered a mulatress and was the term that they used at the time, and the overseer of the plantation. And Marguerite was held in bondage by the plantation owner. And she was not, her job there was in essence to service him. It was sexual abuse. She was kept in that house for that purpose, and it was a really appalling situation. But during the Civil War, she was able to escape and leave the plantation. And she ultimately married a white man, a Hungarian immigrant. And she herself chose to identify as white. And they were living in this kind of up and coming neighborhood, and she became friends with a woman named Alice, who had a very similar background to her. And then it's about these interconnected families in the New Orleans area at that time who were descended from both enslaved women or free women of color and white men, and what they had to do to survive and the choices that they made in terms of their identification of their race.
Now, are you originally from Louisiana?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm a 10th generation Louisiana native.
Oh, okay. Wow. Wow. And my co-host is from New Orleans. She
Oh,
she couldn't be
wonderful.
on tonight, but she's um from New Orleans. So
Yes.
this would have been a really good I hate that she missed because she had another obligation, a family obligation, um, a graduation today.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
family graduation. But so one of our viewers said that she loves the topic, and as an author, she says, I'd love to get in touch myself. Um, so I don't know if it's get in touch with you. Maybe she'll clarify that. But so you 10th generation Louisiana, that's a lot of generations because I can go back in my particular family, I can go back 7 generations on my mother's side. They
That's
kept really
wonderful.
good records.
That's
But we
wonderful.
couldn't go past the last slave. That was
Mhm.
where we couldn't go beyond her because there weren't enough records for us to
Sure.
find that. So, but that is, I think it was common throughout the South,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
but Louisiana had um, a particularly different, maybe because of the French connection.
Yes.
Can you
It's
talk about
very,
that a little bit?
sure. It's very culturally similar to the Caribbean. And because of the fact that Louisiana was a French colony first and then a Spanish colony. So it's very similar to this kind of Latin Caribbean idea. And even our legal system was different. We followed the civil law. The rest of the United States followed the common law system. So even the laws pertaining to slavery were different here. And as a result of a number of factors I talk about in the introduction, including the population makeup and kind of what was going on here in Louisiana at the time, plus those kind of more fluid ideas about race that came from that Caribbean background, we have had a tripartite racial caste system in New Orleans. So you had a you of course had white people, the European and Europeans and their descendants, and then you had a large population of free people of color who had been emancipated and who had a great deal of wealth and prestige and were educated and were tradesmen and craftsmen and very skilled. And then you had the enslaved population. So things were literally not black and white ever here in Louisiana. It was always seen as there were these three different groupings, and there was not. When we think today, we think black and we think white, or during those times of Jim Crow, Negro, and white. But in Louisiana, there was always the term colored, and that was this grouping of in between. And of
Okay.
course, the idea of being Creole at the
Mm-hmm.
time, Creole from its origins just meant born in the colony. So it meant anybody born in Louisiana, regardless of race. But then, as time evolved, people began to use Creole as if it meant, a mixture of the
Like
races.
mulatto was like a
Yes.
synonymous with mulatto.
Well, they started to try to because you see all the old Creole families, whether you were black or white, were all interconnected, if that makes sense.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yes, it does make sense. Um, I saw a movie once called, I think it was called Southern Comfort, and it was centered around the Louisiana white people that lived like off to themselves, that were Creole. They spoke like, I don't know what, it's not French. French is like a
Mhm.
mixture of French and English. This, I guess, is it a Creole language?
Well, there
What is
is.
that?
It's called Corivini, but that was more of the Creole enslaved population that spoke that. But yeah, French was commonly spoken here in Louisiana. I mean, up until my grandmother's generation.
Oh, okay. And the aspect of having three different groupings, that was true in South Africa also.
Ah.
Mhm. Maybe, and maybe some other countries. I know they had the color. You could be black, or you could be white, or you could be colored, which
Mhm.
meant you were mixed with
Yes.
something.
Yes.
So, but that's interesting about, I know Louisiana, people say they always have kind of had a colorism issue, um, in Louisiana, especially among the black population.
Yeah, they're in New Orleans, that and throughout the plantation parishes that is unfortunately a reality, and that's just part of the caste system that was in place throughout the South because it was all about proximity to whiteness, and whoever was closer to being white could, in some ways, find benefit from it. But at the same time, the system was incredibly brutal to anybody who the one drop rule, of course, existed here, and it was
Right.
1/32. If you had 1/32, a fraction of African ancestry, you would be classified as black. And that was true up until 1983 in Louisiana. When I was 1 year old, the law was finally changed. So,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, someone wanted to repeat the title of the book. So while we're talking about it, it's behind you. It's called Invisible Blackness.
Yes, ma'am.
Mm.
A
And
Louisiana family. Oh,
who's
yes.
that pictured on the cover? Is that Alice?
So this is not, we do not have any extant images of Alice, but this is a wonderful this comes from a wonderful series of photographs that was taken during the Civil War by abolitionists from up north to try to raise money for freedmen's causes, and for abolitionist causes as the Union Army came down into New Orleans and occupied New Orleans. They discovered this, population of people who could pass for white, and they were enslaved. And this was contrary to so many Northerners' perceptions of what slavery was. And they had this belief that in showing these Northerners who maybe were on the fence about abolitionism, that there were indeed these children who looked white but were being enslaved, that perhaps that could help move them on the question of slavery. If and they used these photos, they sold them as a means of raising money for freedmen and abolitionist causes.
Oh, Lord. Well, that's something I hadn't heard before. Um, so now, what made you interested in this particular topic? And I'm assuming do you teach college? You're a college
No,
professor?
ma'am, but I will be going to Tulane in the fall to get my PhD. I've been a professional historian, and more of a public historian for over 20 years now. I've worked at historic house sites, particularly plantations along the River Road, focusing on the enslaved communities there and really telling the stories that had been hidden or erased over the course of time. And that was part of how I encountered Marguerite's story while I was working at Laura Plantation.
Oh, okay. So you're a public historian. So is that equivalent to a librarian, or is it kind of like my niece worked for a time. She got her master's in I don't know exactly what it's in, like historical preservation or something, but her goal was to work at a museum. But her first one of her first positions, and she was in New Orleans, but she's since moved to the Atlanta area. But she worked at the Whitley, is it the Whitley Plantation?
Whitney
Whitney
Plantation.
Plantation. She
Yes.
worked there as some kind of coordinator when she first um, got her master's.
Yes, I have my master's degree in history, and in 2005, when I graduated, I went to work at Whitney Plantation in the very early days before it was open, and I
Okay.
did research for them for about 3 years.
Okay, well, it's a small world.
Yes.
She, I would say she was maybe 8 years ago when she worked there, something like that.
Okay.
So you all's paths probably didn't cross.
No, that
Mhm.
was in my very early days of my career.
Yeah. So what got you interested in this specific topic, like this person, this topic of passing, um, or is it your background specifically being a 10th generation Louisiana, or was it something that triggered it,
Mhm.
or just what got you involved in the research for the book?
Well, it was a lot of that my background and the stories I grew up hearing about history and about the past, both my own family's past and just the past in general here in Louisiana. I could tell that things were being left out, that a whole population of people was not being acknowledged, or when they were acknowledged, were being discussed in a disparaging way or in a way that didn't properly acknowledge the fact that, for example, a plantation is not primarily about the big house and the white family that lived there in opulence. The majority of the people who lived on a plantation were enslaved. They were people of color, they were black. And so when I would visit these historic sites, I would sense that there was a large amount of people's stories that were being completely left out or told in such a way as if they were even acknowledged, they were referred to as the servants. And of course, they were always happy and were well treated. And I just have always been a child who asked questions and was not satisfied with the explanations I was receiving. So I began to do my own research and to really delve into primary source documents. Um, and I also, my faith as a Christian and as a Catholic also had a role in that because I believe we're all children of God and we're all called to see the humanity in each other. And a lot of what I was being taught and learning at church on Sunday was not being carried out the rest of the week. So, um, at that point, I just said, we have to tell these stories and do something to work towards healing and justice. There will never be justice this side of heaven for the dead people that I study. But I can do my part to be a voice for the voiceless and tell their story. And in a way, make sure that people know that they are deserving of dignity and that their stories matter, their lives mattered, and that this cannot go unknown and untalked about anymore. And Marguerite was she was horrifically and brutally treated. She was raped and sexually exploited, and I just could not let that go. And so I had to be sure to tell her story. And along the way, it led to me seeing how there was just really, really horrible things happening beginning in the 1890s in terms of racial violence and brutality and the stripping away of civil rights and lynchings, and that how that led people like Marguerite and her friend Alice and their children to make the difficult choice of having to pass as white or identify as white in an effort to seek a better life for their children. And as a result, I uncovered the fact that the recorder of births and marriages and deaths in New Orleans was on a personal crusade against these families and was outing them and refusing to give them birth certificates or marriage licenses. And he referred to it as his crusade for the purity of the white race. And this went on through the 60s and the 1970s even. So there were people whose whole lives were ruined by this, and I felt that that needed to be told.
Oh, wow. So, a couple of things that you mentioned. One, you know, the Catholic faith is very strong in, I don't know if it's just New Orleans or the whole state of Louisiana. Is it the whole state?
All of the South, central down to South Louisiana, yes.
Okay, okay. Um, and that's not necessarily true. Well, for Black populations in other places,
Right.
it's more prominent in Louisiana. I think probably than any other state uh,
Yeah.
in terms of percentages. So the fact that people were passing, um, that's not a new thing, and it was common, but it may have been more common. I don't know if there were more people in Louisiana that could pass.
I think
Um,
that was true, yes.
mhm. Yeah, there were more that had the ability to do it.
And
And
many of them actually went then with the Great Migration, if
mhm,
they could, left and moved to other places. And there are literally thousands of people who could trace their ancestry back here and have no idea that they could be traced back to slavery. They're living essentially, they believe themselves to be exclusively of European ancestry and living as white.
yeah, because they did, you would want to sort of relocate. Otherwise, you could be outed.
Exactly. And there was
And
that was dangerous.
yes, yes. Um, in putting together the information for the book, what kind of did you encounter obstacles in doing your research, and what were the primary sources of research? And then were you able to find any actual like people with ancestry that would talk to you? Were you able to incorporate that in the book, or was it primarily focused on these two women?
Well, it was focused on these two women in a specific way to tell a more universal story. So their stories and the families connected to them kind of reflect everything that was going on during the period. And I really tried to keep it, um, I end it in such a way that I don't really I didn't want to incorporate anyone necessarily in the present day because I was trying to be very sensitive and respectful of the descendants. I did get in touch with a few who were very receptive, and I acknowledged them in the acknowledgments of my book, but I tried to keep it in a more historic context as opposed to a contemporary one, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Um,
it
my
does.
research is because the people that I study are marginalized and not really part of the broader historic narrative, it can be very difficult to find information on them. So my research, it's almost like being a forensic genealogist, if you know what I mean. So you have to
Hmm.
dig very deeply and with a fine-tooth comb. And I used everything from courthouse records involving slave inventories and succession records of deceased plantation owners um, to census records, Freedmen's Bureau records, Catholic Church records, which are very beneficial to people here in South Louisiana because the enslaved population here, if they were enslaved by Catholics, they were baptized and may have funeral records, and it makes it much more, it makes it possible to potentially trace them in a way that's not available if they were Protestant. Um, I used a lot of newspaper records, court records, lawsuits, Supreme Court cases from that time. I scoured everything. It was my notes section is very long and detailed, but I've been doing this a long time. So, and this particular story I've been working on, I guess I've been about a decade before it being published.
Okay, now is your book published by a traditional publisher or like a university press?
It's a university press. It's Louisiana State University Press, LSU Press.
Okay, all right. So, uh, they would, well, depending on how commercial you could make it, because there've been different books about passing, but they normally are fiction, not
Right.
as many nonfiction or historical books. But it was a very common phenomenon that actually was put to film, several films on it from older classic films. Like
Oh, yes.
there's one, The Band of Angels, that was a movie with Clark Gable and Sidney
Oh,
Poitier. And there was a woman in that, who played that? Yvonne DiCarlo played the mixed race person who didn't realize she was until her father died, and then it all came out.
mm.
So she was treated, even though she she didn't even know that she had black blood, but she found out. It was depicted very well acted.
There have been a lot of films, and of course Nella Larson, I believe
Yes,
her name, with Pat, her book on passing. They then, I believe,
yes,
Netflix made a film about it.
yes, they did. I saw part of it, but I couldn't get into it because the actresses that they had
Mm.
they couldn't pass. I could
Well,
tell
that's
you
kind of
know,
how I feel
it,
felt about it.
okay,
We're
so I wasn't
talking
the only one who noticed. Okay.
No, no, and we're talking that they looked like the child on this cover of this
Yes,
book.
yes,
So it's not what was depicted in that film, right?
right. There was. And then there's another one, Raintree County. Have you ever heard of Raintree County?
Yes, with wasn't that Elizabeth Taylor?
Yes, Elizabeth Taylor. And she was well, they never came
Mm.
out and said that she was, but it was always inferred that she was the daughter of a slave that her father um, had as a concubine. What
And of course,
her?
Showboat too. Showboat.
Yeah,
Um,
I have I ever seen Showboat? I don't know if I've ever seen
I don't know that I'd recommend it.
it.
Unfortunately, a lot of these stories were not handled well, you know?
That's true. Now, in the one with Liz Taylor with Raintree County, she was they depicted her as being mentally unstable, which was kind of, a way of saying
Hmm.
because she was mixed race, it was just so much going on that she couldn't handle any of it. But Montgomery Clift he was the actor that was her love interest.
They were friends in real life. That was a good combo. I
Yeah,
remember.
and they were in some other movies.
That's right. That's
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, that was
But
actually a good. It was like a 3 hour movie, or maybe even longer. It's one of those long movies like Gone with the
right.
Wind, but it was similar length. One
Yeah.
of those. It was good. It was
So
actually
it's something everyone's, I think, always known about or whispered about, but
yeah.
hasn't actually approached in a scholarly way or in a way where there's not a stigma attached. For a long time, and I understand why it was stigmatized, but I think increasingly we're looking at it almost as an act of resistance because a lot of these people who chose to pass were doing it because so you can look at the number of people who were choosing to pass and the era in which this was happening at its height, and it directly correlates with the most brutal years of life in the South for people of color.
Hmm.
So you're seeing that they were doing it to for economic reasons, for educational reasons, for quality of life reasons, for safety reasons. And so it can become understandable when you think about, okay, my children, what do you want for your children? And then there were, as you said, there were individuals who didn't even realize what their past held. So,
Right. And also, I forgot about Queen. Have you ever seen Queen, which is the sequel to Roots? Well, it was the
oh
opposite
yes,
side of Roots. Alex Haley's
yes.
let's see, which one was the dad? The dad side. The dad side was Roots. Queen
Oh,
was his mother's side.
oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And Halle Berry played in that as the mix. She was the offspring. See, the
Mhm.
her mother was Jasmine Guy.
Yes.
Okay, so Jasmine Guy played the mother. She was in love with the son of the slave, the plantation owner. Then they had Halle Berry, but when she was the little girl actress was played by I can't call her name right now. The little girl that she was in the Cosby Show.
Uh,
Raven Simone. Raven
yeah.
Simone played the little girl. And
Oh,
then when they went to years later, Halle Berry played the adult. And she was always mixed up and confused because she was rejected by and she tried passing. She did try passing, and it had disastrous results. And but she was always conflicted. She loved her white family, but they wouldn't acknowledge her as part of the family. So that
And
was
yeah.
another depiction that came to my mind.
And in New Orleans and Southeast Louisiana, a lot of these families, the white, and I use that, they're white and then the black, which they're all interconnected, right? So that's kind of one of the themes of the book is that we're all actually interconnected and actually family. But they often acknowledged each other before this whole Americanization took hold in Louisiana. Before the Creole ways, the more Caribbean ways were let go of. After the Civil War, things became Americanized and English would become the official language. And there was just a real profound shift away from the old ways. So these old Creole families who had always known of each other and often acknowledged each other suddenly began to distance themselves. And it's a different kind of pattern and cultural shift than what you see in the rest of the South, if
Hmm.
that makes sense.
It does. Now, you mentioned something in your background that is also mentioned in other literature, that one of your uh, grandparents or great grandparents or great back then
Right.
had a black wife and they actually lived together or something like that. There was, what was that depicted in? Films that are historical always
Mhm.
have an impact on me because if they're done
Yeah.
well, they really do tell the story of what took place.
Right. And in Louisiana, so in my particular case, the white wife was the legitimate wife, and then he had the second family. But in Louisiana, intermarriage was legal between 1868 and 1894. And then with the tightening of the Jim Crow system, it
Okay.
became outlawed. Interracial marriage became outlawed in 1894. And by 1908, they had something called the Concubinage Act, which said that black and white people, or people of color and white people, could not even cohabit together. And they were being prosecuted for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, this is a very, very interesting topic, Katie. And how's your book doing?
It's doing very well. It's on its second printing. I was astonished and I just am so happy that people recognize that Marguerite's and Alice's stories are meaningful, that their names are being said and their lives are being honored.
Well, congratulations on the book and show it one more time
Yes,
in front of the
ma'am.
screen. It's called Invisible Blackness, and the subhead is a Louisiana family in the age of racial passing. So, thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Thank
And
you for having me.
you had
It was
some really
delightful.
interesting comments. And I referred your book to one of my really good book customers who loves history, and she bought a copy of the book.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. Have a great evening.
You too. Take care.
Okay. All right. So as I had mentioned to you all, um, our our second schedule, our third scheduled guest isn't able to be on because of a health challenge. So what we did, we went a little bit longer with Katy, and then for our second guest, I'm bringing on shortly, we're going to give him a little bit more time, and this should be a really good conversation. Also, for those who didn't join at the top of the show, we have the Black Authors Matter TV Awards. The voting ends tonight at 11:59. And if you haven't voted, or if you want to vote one last time for your favorites, please do so. The award show is 2 weeks from tonight on May 13th. And our award show is always grand and it's an amazing event. So, and we do it right here live at the same time. And the whole evening is dedicated to announcing the winners of the awards and giving them their awards. So, our next guest has been on the show before, but it's been a while. And well, it's been about a year because he was on with his first book, and he's with Black Odyssey Media. And his first book, Outraged, he was on the show to talk about that. And he's got a brand new book out today. Today is the release day. And the book is called Shadows of Justice. So you have the book in your hand and it's available wherever books are sold. And we welcome back Brian Copeland to Black Authors Matter TV.
Well, thanks for having me. I had such a good time last year when we got to talk about it once a year.
Yeah, well, we try to have people on when they have a new release.
No, I know.
Because our audience is, looking for the next new thing.
Of course.
But congratulations on the second installment.
Thank you.
And now, is this going to be a continuing series, or
yeah.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that was always the plan from the very beginning. The way that I designed it, it's gonna. If God is with me and readers are with me, I'd like to do one a year for the rest of my life. That was always my plan.
Well, some really good series just go on and on and on. If they have a compelling main character that has a lifespan that the writer can really extend by having some good plots and good storylines, then they're good. The longest one, and I can't remember the author's name now, so I shouldn't even mention it, but I read one mystery, and it was a mystery. It was 10 books, and I read all 10. But I can't call his name.
Oh, there are series that go way beyond that. I mean, Jonathan Kellerman, who was kind enough to blurb this book, has been writing Alex Delaware novels since 1982. Sue Grafton, who did A's for Alibi and made it all the way up to Y before she passed. She didn't get to Z, died right after Y. She wrote Kinsey Millhone for 40 years. Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote the Perry Mason books. I think he did something like 80 or 90 of those, from like the 30s until he died in like 1970 or something. So there are
they're out there.
Oh, Walter Mosley, has been writing Easy Rollins for 30 years, 40 years, something like that.
Yeah, well, I haven't read those other books, so I never read Sue Grafton. I see him, but I know in the alphabet books, that's what I call them. And I guess that's what everybody else calls them, but I haven't read it. I've in the last 10 years or so, there have been so many Black authors releasing books that probably 80-90% of the books I read are about Black authors. And if I had to pick an author non-Black author whose books I have read the most of in the last 20 years or so, it would be John Grisham. I've read, but he doesn't do series. I don't know if
I think his are all standalones.
They're standalones.
One or two, I think I read of his, but he only does the standalones. But from what I understand, I've been told by a couple of people in the industry that's what they're looking for. Just
oh, they are.
And I planned on this literally before I wrote the first one, I planned on this and studied this and decided I was going to do this 20 to 25 years before I wrote the first book.
Wow. Yeah. That's a long-term plan.
Yeah. Well, what the deal was is I had back in 2000, I was going through a life change. I had been doing stand-up comedy for 22 years at that point. I was opening for Smokey Robinson and Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin and Natalie Cole and Dionne Warwick and the Temptations, Earth, Wind and Fire, all these folks touring. And I was also working in Bay Area television. I hosted the Fox Morning Show for 5 years, and I hosted an afternoon show for ABC for a couple of years. And so then in 2000, I was in kind of a transition mode where I left the Fox Morning Show. I was going through a divorce and a custody fight, and I was trying to figure out, okay, so what do I want to do with the rest of my career? What do I want to do? I've been doing stand up for 22 years, and I've gone probably about as far as I can go, ride that horse. And so I was staying at this place in San Diego, this kind of retreat place where you walk around and eat raw vegetables and ponder. And I decided, okay, there are three things that I want to do before what was I, 30, 36 at the time? So, before I go and meet my maker. One is I want to do a one-man stage show that's not just stand-up. I want to be able to do comedy in it and be able to do serious and dramatic stuff. Second thing is I want to partner a major motion picture. Third thing is I want to write crime fiction. And what I figured was that when I got done with everything else, when I could no longer perform on stage, I was too old or just decided I don't want to do it anymore, I could always sit at a desk and write. I've been writing since I was 12 years old when I got my first newspaper column, the local weekly throwaway. I got 200 words a week. I was 12 years old. So I figured,
Well,
that
good for you. Where was this? What city was that in?
When I was writing at San Leandro, California, where I live right now, or still same place. I'm still
Oh,
in my
okay.
hometown, right next door to Oakland. Right next door to Oakland.
Okay.
So the plan was that in the meantime, since that was going to be down the line, like when I'm ready to retire, kind of a thing, the plan was, while I'm working on the other two things, the one-man show and figuring out how to get in a movie, I'm going to study. I'm going to learn everything I can possibly learn about writing crime fiction, and I will have years, to do that. So across the street from the place I was staying was a little strip mall. I think it was a Borders. I think I went to in there, and I picked up two books. I picked up Stephen King's On Writing, which is the best book on writing I have ever read. I've read it like 5 times, and I picked up A is for Alibi. So I got to. I was reading everybody, as many people as I could possibly read, and I thought, gosh, I wish I could talk to some of these people and these writers and figure out how they do what they do. Then I realized, idiot, you got a radio show. And at the time, I had a radio show on the ABC affiliate San Francisco, and I did that for 27 years. I was weekly, and then I went daily with it. And I figured, well, what if I invite authors? What do you do? Well, what if I invite authors on, and they'll come on because they want to promote their books, and then during the commercials, I'll pick their brains and find out how it is they do what they do. So that's how I learned. I learned from all these great people I would have on radio with me. Then during the commercials, I would ask them questions. And they didn't realize I was picking their brain. Most of them. Some ended up being friends. Later on. And in the meantime, I wrote the one-man show. It was supposed to go for 6 weeks, called Not a Genuine Black Man, and that ended up being my first book. About growing up here in San Leandro in the 70s, when San Leandro was 99.9% white and us. And what it was
just your family?
My family. And what it was like to grow up in that environment. So this play.
Now, how did you get to that town or small city? Was your dad in the military?
No. Well, yes, that's another story. That's another. So we moved around. He was in the service, but that's not why we ended up here. I was born in Akron, and when he was in the service, we moved around a little bit. We got here to the Bay Area when I was 6, and to San Leandro when I was 8. And the reason we got in this, as I said, there's a million stories. As far as I can tell, my mother passed when I was 14, and Grandma raised us. And my mother was very, very sedity. Yes, that's the only word I can think of to use. My mother.
Yeah, that's an old word, but I know exactly what it means. Exactly what I mean. It's like bougie, but old school.
Exactly. That's a great way to describe it. Yes, exactly. and so I think that's why she ended up here, not knowing how racist this place was. So this play I wrote about, about what it was like and what it did to me, as a kid and how it affected me as an adult, was supposed to run for 6 weeks in San Francisco. And I figured, okay, then I'll be on something else and I can scratch that off my list. And instead, it ended up becoming the longest running one-man show in Bay Area theatrical history. Ran 7 years, went off Broadway, 30 American cities. Rob Reiner is developing it right now. We're working on it for television, to develop it for TV. And in the meantime, an agent friend of mine calls me up and says, I think that story would make a good book. So I go, really? Yeah. So I wrote, I took the play and I did a novelization of it. And it ended up being a bestseller here in the Bay Area. And it's being used to this day. It came out in 2006. It's used as in a lot of schools and mainly college classes across the country. Now,
kind of a teaching tool.
Yeah, it's a teaching tool. Since they've been banning books, who knows where it is? But I know that it is being used places. Because I go to textbook sites every once in a while to check and see, and it's there. But that was my first book. Was a nonfiction book. It was a complete and total accident. Complete and total accident.
Well, you know, books can be that way. I'm a writer too, so you know that a lot of times what you end up writing about isn't necessarily what you thought you were going to write about.
Exactly.
This is just something happens that should trigger you to pull the trigger on whatever the project was, whatever the concept was, or you know, it's like that when you write. Now, when you the concept that you talk about, Not a Genuine Black Man, it was it like the 70s? Was that when that was going on?
The story jumps back and forth.
Okay.
It starts when I'm 8 years old in 1972. And what it is it's like 30 characters. I play all the characters to tell the story. It's a 2-hour show, stage show.
Oh, okay.
And we just, I've since done another 6 one-man shows that I continue to perform. And I bring Genuine out on special occasions now, you know, up to that long first run. Like I'm going to do it for Juneteenth. I'll do a Juneteenth show.
Oh, okay.
But it was the 70s when we first moved here, and the early 2000s when all of the stuff that I went through as a kid, you know, all of the racism and adults driving on the street yelling the N-word at me, and all of this kind of stuff that led me at some point to be I was too black for the white people, and then because of where I grew up, I was too white for black people. And that led to basically what was described as PTSD I was diagnosed with from all those experiences. And where the title came from was a radio listener of mine who sent me an unsigned letter. I still to this date, I have no idea who sent it, but it changed my life. And the letter said, as an African American, I'm disgusted every time I hear your voice because you are not a genuine black man. And I thought, bingo. I've been looking for an idea for what to write a story about, and this is the story I'm going to tell. So it was a fluke, a complete fluke and accident.
Well, yes, so some hate mail turned into the title for a show.
Yeah.
For a show.
Last year we had the 1,000th performance of that show. The 1,000th performance of that show, yeah.
You know, that still is not a resolved issue.
No, it isn't.
It comes up, you know, I tell people, even doing this show and what I do with the National Black Book Festival, I tell people I get it on both sides. I get comments on our page. So we have a huge social media audience for our page, 100,000 people.
Wow.
A couple of times a week, I'll get a comment on one of the posts from a white person that says, this is racist. The idea. But then on the other hand, I'll get varying types of comments from Black people that it's not radical enough or, you know, whatever. But that's why on this show, I stay totally away from politics because that's being talked about everywhere, but literature isn't. So I try to keep the show about books, whatever the books that people are writing, because that information needs to get out there.
Now, see, the books that I'm doing are they're mystery thrillers, but they're social commentary.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
They're all about
That's
something.
great. Yeah, that's great.
I mean,
because you can't, when you're writing contemporary, you can't remove it. It can't be divorced from the zeitgeist, so to speak, the times, the culture, but I mean, just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth about politics. I don't talk about it on the show because that's being talked about everywhere else. all day long, 24/7. You can hear that various places, all kinds of places, but you can't find out about the latest books that are being released on all types, fiction and nonfiction.
Well, even I told you I would have, when I had my ABC show, I would have authors on, and I would get pushback from management almost all the time that I was having too many authors on. Well, people who want to read books aren't reading books. They're not listening to the radio. Well, now no one's listening to the radio, but but at the time, it was like, oh God, you got another author on. Say, just leave me alone and let me do what I do. My ratings are good. If the ratings go down, I'm not putting authors on, then we can have a conversation. Otherwise, just leave me alone. Just leave me alone.
Really, it's interesting.
And then when they started to get really paranoid about what was happening with radio audiences dwindling for terrestrial radio, which they are. When you and I were growing up, we heard new music on the radio.
Right.
Now, my kids, I don't even know where, my son's a musician. I don't know where the heck he gets his music. I think they get it off of YouTube or something.
Yeah, I don't know either. I have a daughter this 20, she'll be 29 next month. I don't know where she finds out about songs. Well, and the music that I like is the music that I grew up with in my teen, my formative years and my 20s and even 30s. It kind of went, like, to me, it just
See, that's a sign of age.
It just didn't have it doesn't, it's not the same. I listen to Pandora, so I'll have different stations with different themes, kind of, and I have one station that really I've been listening to lately. It's based on Mysterious Vibes. Do you remember the song Mysterious Vibes by the Blackbirds? I think it was.
I'm not the top of my head. Sing a few bars.
You know the song. It was men singing it, so it's hard for me to sing as deep as they were. Mysterious vibes that we share.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
See, yeah. I knew you would know that.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
It plays the best music. I mean, it just brings in all kinds of stuff. Eddie Kendricks, some of the early Isley Brothers stuff, just BT Express, Ohio Players. Even the older Ohio players that were Funky Worm and Ecstasy. But just the music is just amazing, and they had bands, and the people could actually sing, and so I love it. I love it.
But see, when we say that, we sound old.
We do, but it's real music.
It's real music. Here's how ancient I felt. I was having dinner with my daughter, Easter dinner with my daughter, my son-in-law, and my youngest son, the one who's a musician. He does a fusion of like rap and rock together. Okay. And I was explaining to them tell me if you did this, being a kid, listening to the radio with the microphone of a cassette recorder next to it, wait for your favorite song to come on.
So you can hit it.
You hit it as soon as the DJ would just shut up and let
because sometimes they was, and that was how you got recordings, because you didn't have the money to buy all the records. So that was, and the station that we had, I grew up in Newport News, Virginia. The black station, after about 8 o'clock, the power would be less and it would be staticky.
So it was a low watt station you could get for the day.
Yeah. So, but
at night,
that was how we recorded music because you know we would get the 45s,
yep.
but because we had a record store as a black man that owned a record store like a few blocks from our house, so we would walk to the record store and get the latest thing. Just
Yeah, you were talking about that the era of music you were talking about. Maybe I hardly never think about this. I have a an uncle who I didn't know very well, a great uncle really, who was a and actually my dad sang with him sometimes too. Remember Ruby and the Romantics? Our Day Will Come. Our Day
yes, but I
Will
didn't know
Come.
who sang it.
Yeah, Ruby and the Romantics from Akron. And
Oh,
and I,
okay.
my uncle was one of the romantics, and my father used to sing with them on street corners in Akron. So I'm told before I was born. So I'm told.
Oh, because see, I thought that was somebody like Martha Reeves or um somebody like that sang that. But I believe you.
Yeah, no,
That's who I
Troy.
would have guessed. I would have guessed it was. So anyway, this has been, it's like reminiscing on the times when you told me about you all being the only black family.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded, even though my situation was a little bit different, we moved into a Jewish neighborhood. My dad was a pastor, and the church bought church parsonage in the nicest part of town, which was a Jewish neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And we were the first black family that moved into the neighborhood. So I understand exactly what you're talking about. Um, the way our house was, it was on a corner, and our driveway was circular, and you could enter it from either side, either street. And on Saturday, when the Jewish people in the neighborhood would walk to the synagogue, they would walk through our driveway as if it was a street, as if it was, yeah, they
A
would
public
just,
sidewalk.
yeah, they would just walk and not say, excuse us. I mean, they just acted like it was, and they
Public
would peep
property.
out their windows at us. They wouldn't speak. They would just, but within 5 years, that neighborhood was all black. Black
That's how it
professional
works.
people moved in. The real estate people turned it over, and it was occupied by teachers and doctors and lawyers, and it's all black middle class neighborhood. Within 5 years, it's
Well,
totally
that's
split.
because of white flight. And I
Yeah.
talk a lot in Not a Genuine Black Man. I talk in the book. I'm able to go into a lot more detail than in the show. And I researched the history of redlining and of white flight. And San Leandro, where I live, for example, was where Oakland had a healthy black population for years and years and years, and still to this day does. And you had a lot of African Americans who moved during the Great Migration during World War II, the second Great Migration. They moved to the Bay Area to work on the shipyards. Then the war
Okay.
was over, and they'd say, "Well, I'm not going to go back to Mississippi. What do I want to do that for?" So there ended up being a white flight of people white people who had homes in Oakland running to San Leandro because San Leandro had race covenants, and realtors would not show you a home if you were black. They would not show you a home in the city. So
Okay.
yeah, it was a pretty eye-opening thing because when people think about that kind of stuff, they think about if my story took place in Mississippi or Alabama in the 60s and 70s, people would go, "And your point is what?" You know, and
Yeah.
not San Francisco. They
Well,
don't think
or California,
or
period.
California. You know,
Mhm.
so so that's why with the books that I do, the books that I'm doing now, the fiction books, when I finally got around to writing, I started this series about 10 years earlier than I figured I was going to start it. And it's only because of the pandemic. Because I had a run set up of my latest one-man play. It was supposed to open in April of 2020. Then we had the shutdown and there was nothing. And I was going
Right.
out of my head. You can only watch so much Netflix. So I thought, why
Right.
don't I write this book I've been thinking about, for 20 years, because I knew from my preparation, I knew who my characters were going to be. I knew what my setting was going to be. I knew that I wanted them to be social commentary. That, you have the mystery and the thriller part, and that's because people want to be entertained. But,
Mhm.
but also, I have a message I can slip in. And like the first book, Outraged, that I was here to talk about last time, is about the shooting of somebody's killing cops who have shot unarmed people of color and not been held accountable for it. That's the plot of it. And my detective is Topher Davis, who is a African-American broadcast journalist in San Francisco.
So is he you or you him?
No, but I picked that because I know that world.
Okay.
See, I spent so much time in Bay Area broadcasting and TV and radio. I know that I spent 27 years in that world. So I know how it works. I know what people say when the doors are closed, that kind of stuff. So and his sister, Lynn Sloan, who is an SFPD homicide. San Francisco is about 20 minutes from me, from where it is that I live. And I put him and his sister over in Castro Valley, which is the next suburb over. So it all takes place in the East Bay and around San Francisco and all around the Bay Area. And she's a former Navy, Army Ranger. And I figured when I was studying these books that every one of these detectives has a buddy who is, quite frankly, I don't know if I can say the A word here or not, but a bad, who, can go to a bar and beat up 10 guys. I thought, you know what? I've never seen a woman do that. I've never seen a book where that's a woman. So I made his sister, she's the one who can fight. He can't fight, Topher can't fight, he can't shoot. But there's a couple of messages in it. One of them is, one of the themes, of course, is the main theme, of course, about the shooting of unarmed people of color. But the other theme is, is just what it's like to be a Black man in America, and why his name is Topher. When he was born Christopher Davis, and I read an article that when people who are white people and in charge of hiring are looking at job applications, if there is a name on the job application that looks the least bit ethnic in any way, it's an unconscious bias, from what the articles I read said. It's an unconscious bias in most situations. They disregard them more so than those where they look at it and they think it sounds like a white person, or they can't tell. So Christopher Davis, when he was trying to get into broadcasting and get an internship, kept getting turned down. But he thought, okay, there's all these white boys calling themselves Topher. I'll put that on it. Put that on my application. And then he started getting callbacks. So that's that's the kind of stuff that I slip in.
No, when I saw that because I read Outraged and enjoyed it very much.
Oh, thank you.
Of course, it's been like 20 books or 30 books back. No, more than that. More like 40 books. But I just remember I really liked it. And I remember Topher was an odd name. Mm-hmm. And I had never seen it before.
Oh, yeah. God, there's when I was trying to come up with a name, there was a period of time when there were all these white boy actors, Topher Grace, and like 3 or 4 of them. And I thought, that sounds like the whitest white boy name. That's why I thought of what sounds like a white boy name that you couldn't.
Well, Hunter is very white.
Hunter is, yeah.
I've never met a Black hunter, although I'm sure they're out there somewhere.
Yeah, I haven't either.
But I've never met one. That's a very white name.
And I've certainly never met a Topher. And his sister calls him Chris. His sister calls him Chris.
Yes.
But everybody else does. So the second book, Shadows of Justice, that I'm going to hold.
Yes, the brand new one.
So pretty.
I have to get my copy of that. My to be read shelf, because of this show, my to be read bookcases are vast, and I'm into book clubs, and so I won't say I've started to be a collector, just because there's so many books. I really feel blessed. There are so many good books that are being released by Black authors that it's really great to have so many choices.
Yeah, it really is. Mm-hmm. It really is. And I hope that the circumstances don't change between consolidation and the economy and people not having, money to spend on extras.
Yeah, because buying books is disposable income. Unless my disposable income always went to books and music, but once music changed, I don't buy music anymore, but I
Nobody
used
does.
to. Yeah.
Nobody does.
You know, Pandora, I pay for the commercial free Pandora. So somebody gets a penny or two from the songs I listen to on there. But
I do
that's
Spotify. Same thing. Exact same thing.
yeah, my daughter uses that. I like Pandora because I like being surprised. When I pick a channel to listen to, it brings in something. Sometimes it'll bring in songs I haven't heard for decades.
Right.
And I like being surprised.
It's like if you like this, then you'll like this. That's how
Yes,
the algorithm.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. It played that same Mysterious Vibes channel that I have played. The Stylistics, Hurry Up This Way Again. Do you remember that song?
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that song since I was in like high school, and it came on. It came on one day, and I did you know, once you do a thumbs up, it'll come on more. But it'll bring in something randomly that I hadn't heard in a long time. It's like a great song. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't heard this song. And so there was so much
And you
good
go back
music in
there.
that era. Huh?
You go back there. I wrote
You
about
do.
outraged that music is a time machine because
It
every
is.
time I hear a certain song, I remember exactly where I was when I first heard it.
Yes.
You know, when I was in high
Yes.
school, it was all about Michael Jackson's Thriller. When I was in high school,
Okay.
so when I hear Beat It or The Girl Is Mine or that
Thriller was an
automatically
amazing album.
it was
It was amazing. I mean, and it was so different from anything he had done before.
Well, he'd had one solo album before that was actually pretty good. Off the wall. Remember Off the Wall?
Yeah, yes, but Thriller was more.
Theatrical.
It had more of a rock element to it too.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Off the Wall is more pop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He went rock and Thriller, and Beat It. That was
Eddie Van Halen on the guitar, and Beat It in that guitar solo.
Oh, okay.
You know
See,
that?
I never knew that. I never knew that.
That's Eddie Van Halen. Yeah.
Okay, that's why it was rock. I mean, but when I was at a friend of mine's apartment and they played it, and I was like, that's Michael Jackson, because it started with Beat It, and I was like, what? Because it was so different from the things he had done in the past.
Than before. Mm-hmm. It was not the Motown sound.
No, it wasn't. Yeah,
Motown.
that was bubble gun. It became kind of repetitious.
Yeah.
But they had their run for sure.
So the new book that I mentioned before, a publisher gets really mad at me. Me swinging down memory lane with music, and you were forgetting. Oh, we're doing the show.
We do that on this show. I mean, that's when we talk to our guests. It's a conversation. Like we're at their on the couch at their house just talking, and then we talk about their book too. But we talk about anything. So give us just the bullet points about the book, and then talk about one of the arcs in the book, like because you had arcs. You had really good. Okay, in the book, the arc is the point where the reader says, "Oh my God," is one of those "Oh my God" moments. And normally a book needs to have three or four of those.
But I don't, it's not good to do that with this because there's spoilers.
No, I said one. You could do one. You don't have to give all the details.
Well, let me tell you what it's about. What Shadow Justice is about. Remember, I told you every book I write, it's social commentary. This book is about a suburban housewife in Pleasanton, California, which is an upscale, primarily 98% white community, about 25 miles south of San Francisco. And she, comes from a well-off family, and she's pregnant. And she and her husband are having their annual 4th of July barbecue, and she goes to pick up her 4-year-old daughter's playmate and disappears. And the world goes crazy. It turns into, I don't remember if you remember the Lacey Peterson case, or more recently, the Gabby Petito case.
Yes. They made a Netflix movie about that.
Yeah.
Or Hulu. One
No,
of them.
no, it was a Netflix documentary. I just saw it.
Okay.
But the world goes absolutely crazy, and Topher does not want to cover another missing white girl story, but he's got to because everyone is there. You know, Good Morning America's there, and there are new journalists from New Zealand, and in front of the house is like what was Camp OJ. You know what they called the journalists that covered OJ. So he's walking back to the van after covering a press conference in front of the house of the woman, and this African American woman. This could be one of those moments you're talking about. This African American woman, middle aged, walks up to him and says, my name is Josie Walker, and I live in East Oakland, which is primarily black, lower to lower middle class black, and my daughter has been missing longer than this girl has, and I can't get the police to do anything, and I can't get the media to give me any coverage, and I wanted to know, will you help me? So he ends up covering both stories simultaneously. He tries to get Josie Walker's daughter, Danica, who just disappeared coming home from she's a student at San Francisco State in pre-law, and she's working as a receptionist at a law firm, and she just disappears one day after work. So what this is about is the difference in how coverage and police attention are how they differentiate between when it's a white woman who goes missing and when it's a woman of color. And this is a story, I didn't know I was going to write this as a mystery story, but it's a story I thought about for years because I was on the radio during the Laci Peterson case. And I remember that, again, that story was everywhere, and there are a couple of reasons why, but the biggest one was that she disappeared during Christmas week, that week between Christmas and, she disappeared Christmas Eve. And there's no news, but there's a 24-hour news cycle. So they got to fill it with something, and that's why that story got so crazy, because of the fact it was Christmas week. There's nothing else. That's why I said this story, it's 4th of July week when she disappears.
Okay.
So I remember I was on the radio when I was prepping for my show. I was reading an article that the Chronicle did after the story had gone on for a while. San Francisco Chronicle had done, where they audited their own coverage to see how many stories they'd done about Laci Peterson, because it was just starting to come out that there was a woman of color, a Latina woman, who worked in was a maid in one of the hotels in the city in San Francisco, and she disappeared around the same time. And Laci Peterson's body, her torso she's pregnant. Her torso was found in San Francisco Bay. This woman, her name was Evelyn Hernandez, pregnant. Body found, torso found in San Francisco Bay around the same time. And so the Chronicle audited their coverage to see how many Laci Peterson stories have we done. And they've done over 2,000.
Wow.
Over 2,000. Then I said, okay, how many stories have we done about Evelyn Hernandez? That was a woman's name. Two.
Wow.
And the fact that the circumstances were so, and the police department, to this day, they blow it off if you bring up Evelyn Hernandez. Oh, we know what, it was her boyfriend that did it. Well, then why didn't you arrest him and put him in jail if you're so sure? It's so dismissive. I thought about that story ever since, about that, we've seen a million of those kind of cases since Laci Peterson. And I just thought about, I wanted to get into it, and I wanted to address it and hit it head on in terms of, why it's like this. And one of the first things that I learned when I was doing some research was I wondered how many African-American women go missing in this country every year. Take a guess.
I know it's thousands, so I'm going to say 3,000.
You're gonna say 3,000? My guess was about 300.
Okay.
According to the Black and Missing Foundation.
Okay, so what's the number?
In 2023, which was the most recent statistics at the time I was writing this, in 2023, over 280,000.
What?
According to the Black and Missing Foundation, over 280,000 women of color went missing in 2023 in this country. And I dedicate the book, what's the exact number? It's 280,031.
So do they tell you how many end up getting found, or they just say the missing persons?
This is how many were missing. This is how many disappeared.
And
they go into the reasons why. These cases are rarely taken seriously, and the difference is is that the authorities and the news, business journalists, and remember I told you being,
you told me that when you
one
were
of the
on
only people.
before,
Oh,
that they're white males with daughters who are
yeah.
young in their 20s or whatever.
What the deal is yeah, it's the news directors who decide what's covered, and most of them are middle-aged white men. And when they see Gabby Petito or Lacey Peterson, they see their daughter who's her age. But when they see, a 17-year-old African American girl who's got dreadlocks, this doesn't, it doesn't resonate.
It doesn't resonate
in
with them
in the same way. So so that's, if nothing else, that's the biggest argument for diversity in newsrooms. Right there, the fact that this and God love Gabby Petito's family, because they recognize how the coverage that she got for that story, how is completely out of proportion it was to what happens to women of color who go missing. And they have started a foundation to bring attention to not just missing people, but actually an emphasis on women of color who go missing. I didn't know that until I saw that documentary you mentioned earlier that's on Netflix right now. But that's one of the ways they're honoring her, is by making sure that Black women who go missing get coverage too. But
that number that you gave me is really mind-boggling,
isn't it? And among the reasons that that website, Black and Missing Foundation, gives for the dismissal of these cases, is that most of these people come from African American neighborhoods, and these kinds of things happen there. It's much more dangerous there than if you live in an upscale white suburb someplace. Women just don't go missing. Whereas, the stories that they tell that I've read about cases like this are, somebody will go to the police and say, my daughter's missing. She's been missing for 3 days. Oh, she probably ran away. She's probably on drugs somewhere. She's shacked up with a boyfriend somewhere. She'll show up. I mean, that's how they dismiss this. But when it happens in a suburb, and it's a suburb that is primarily white and middle class to upper middle class, these things don't happen there. So if she's an hour late coming home from her job, it's time to call the police. There's none of this waiting 3 days or 48 hours stuff. And so I wanted to say something about that. And I do. And look, all the mysteries there, and the case is interesting, and you're going to have your roller coaster ride, and you're
okay.
Going to
the arcs, okay.
I slip it in.
Well, it's important to, like I say, if it's contemporary, it's important for it to be real. Unless some people write like fantasy, more on a like romance, fantastical, more along those lines. But when you're doing mysteries or crime fiction, then that's more real life. Okay.
Well, you said romance and fantasy.
Yeah, well, no, I mean something
romantic is fantasy.
No, something that's fantastical, like
romance.
And romance or fantasy, but in romances they don't really get into. And I don't read romances, but what I'm told, I've read maybe 3. I need more depth when I read a book. But some people, it's a huge industry.
Oh, it's huge.
That produces thousands and thousands and thousands of titles, and there's a formula, and that's what the readers want, is that formula. See, to me, the formulaic aspect of it makes it too predictable, and I don't want to know the plot of a book before I read it.
Well, it's romance. It's been since the beginning of time. Romance has always been boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl.
Yes,
back.
Yes, yeah. That's the storyline. So I want something that's going to pull at my emotions, make me think. I just finished recently reading a book called, I think, Mr. Johnny. Is it Mr. Johnny from Around the Way? Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way. That's what it is. Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way, by Jeffrey Blunt, who was a director for years, news director at CBS.
Where?
At CBS.
No, I mean where? Do you know where?
The national network.
Oh,
I don't know.
the national. Okay.
Yeah.
It was like I worked for ABC in San Francisco. That's why I wondered which, if it was like at
Oh
CBS in
no,
Chicago or in
he said
Philadelphia or.
he directed like uh the presidential debate with
Okay.
President George H.W. Bush, the
So he was
senior.
working for the network then.
Yes, he worked for the
Okay, good.
network. But Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way, it was really, really a good book.
Okay.
So I mean, and well written, just the characters. They went to I don't, and he was on the show. So the town where this black billionaire ends up is called Ham, Mississippi. But he brings in characters, the abject poverty that goes on in this little town in Mississippi.
Mhm.
He really brings that to the fore through these characters and him moving there to like get away from his circumstances. So anyway, um, your book, I like a book that makes me really
Think.
like the characters have depth and your book was like that, Outrage. So I look forward to reading the new one. And I'm not just saying that because you're on, because I don't say that. I wouldn't say anything at all if I didn't believe that. I would just say it was good. But your book was really good. I enjoyed it.
Thank
And
you.
then I was in New Orleans, I think, when I read it. Then I gave it to Rhonda um, because she was looking for something to read. And we were together in New York for the Harlem Book Fair last year. And I had finished it, so I gave it to her while we were in New York. So it's not it's a borrow, not a sale, but it's still word of mouth advertising.
I'll take it. Well, I'm flattered that you read it. I'm glad that you liked it, and I hope that you like Shadows of Justice.
Yeah, it sounds like a great book. Now, when you were talking about missing white women, the one that this situation, she wasn't missing, but I'm sick of them bringing her up for the last 25 years,
Who?
and that's Jean Benet Ramsey.
But here's the thing about that story, is that it's so weird.
It is weird,
Now, when
but
I was working
she's
in
dead
newsrooms
and she's been dead for 25 years.
well, but it's still okay. But we still talk about Jack the Ripper. If you follow true crime, any unsolved case that was a high-profile case is still fascinating. And this was so weird because most people in America didn't know about that baby beauty pageant scene. That's
Right,
just sick.
right.
When
It's
we
really
saw that,
it's
it's like
twisted.
you got 4 and 5 year old girls with lipstick, and they call them prostitutes. I mean, because that's. So we didn't
Yeah,
know about that world, and then she gets killed on Christmas morning, and it's just so bizarre, and
it is
that's why
bizarre.
they bring it up. That's why
It
they
is
continue
bizarre.
to bring it up.
Yeah,
It,
but she fits, and this is another thing with the whole missing person thing with white females I've noticed. If they're blonde,
oh
it
yeah,
gets more attention.
yep, yep,
And that's the truth.
that's true,
I
absolute
look
truth.
at patterns and trends. I just noticed. That Gabby, she was blonde, or she
Yeah, no,
had the
she's
mixed
blonde.
blondish brown hair.
Yeah,
If they're blonde, it gets more.
we called it in newsrooms even then. We called it a pretty missing white girl syndrome. Was what the name is. What journalists were calling it. Now it's actually coming. I think it was Glenn Eichel actually who came up with that.
Oh, okay.
Who coined that and I could be wrong. I may be misattributing this, but yeah, pretty missing white girl syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly it. They're almost always blonde, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying, and I got to be real careful here because I don't want to come off the wrong way with this. I'm not saying that it is unimportant when a young white woman goes missing. It is important when anyone goes missing. Is my point, and it's just bothersome. How can it not irk you to see there are only so many resources when it comes to the media, and when you've got one case that just sucking up all the air out of the room, and you got 280,000 cases that you had no clue, you had no idea. Like I was talking about, we were talking about Spotify and Pandora, and one of the reasons I like Spotify too is I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and
Oh,
there are so many serial killers who have targeted uh, uh, black girls and black women, because they know that they're not going to get looked for. You know, that's a
Wow.
demographic where they're not going to put a lot of resources into trying to figure out who did it. Not in general. And so these serial killers, they'll pick 4 or 5, or that's who they'll pick up because they know they're least likely. As opposed to you attack some young blonde woman, it's going to be
It'll be on the evening
they're going to
news
find you.
immediately.
They're going to find you.
Yeah, well, you're not disparaging. You're not saying that it's unimportant.
Okay.
You're saying there's a hierarchy.
Yes.
There's a pyramid.
A caste system.
So, yeah, there is.
Mm-hmm.
There is. To what stories get reported with the most energy and attention,
mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to violence. Violent.
I mean, I can't name a case. Can you think of a case? A Gabby Petito, Lacey Peterson, JonBenet Ramsey case where the victim is African American? I mean,
the only one I can think of recently, and it's unfortunate, is the one where I forgot where it was, and it turned out to be a hoax. You know what I'm talking about? The girl says she saw a toddler on the side of the highway.
Oh, yeah.
And she got out of the car, and then she went somewhere, and it was like they were looking for her. And it's almost like, it's bizarre that the one time they do put energy into it, it turns out to be a hoax.
Turns out to be a hoax.
The 100 times they didn't put energy into it, it was real. But then the one time,
it's a hoax.
It's a hoax.
And the thing that's so sickening and frustrating about that is that it gives them a reason to be dismissive of these cases, because that was see, this is why we don't put energy into them. This is why.
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's true. It's true. Well, we're at the end of our time, but what I am going to do is encourage people to get your book, not just to get this book. Do you have a copy of Outraged with you?
It's in the other room. It's in the other room.
Okay. Well, Outraged has a red cover.
Yes.
And although these aren't necessarily, it's not necessarily a sequel.
No, it's the same characters, but
it's the same characters continue. So it's better to read the first book. And then you can immediately go to Shadows of Justice and read Shadows of Justice.
Well, what's cool is a lot of people are telling me that they picked this book up. A lot of people who got the advanced reader copies, and that they didn't know that this was part of a series. And so they read this and loved it, and they are going back to read Outrage, which is cool. So if you haven't read out, you don't have to have read Outrage to read this.
Right. Yeah. But it's always good to sell 2 books. I have 2 fiction titles, and they're sequels, but it took me 5 years to write each of them. So the Genesis Files is the first part. Yes. And then Exodus from Treachery. See, it's a biblical tie-in. Exodus from Treachery is the second part. Well, they are standalones, but there's a main character who's a journalist. That's the common thread. Mm-hmm. So, and you get the backstory in the Genesis Files. But Exodus from Treachery, when people read that, they say, okay, I need to go back and read if they haven't read the Genesis Files.
So what's the third one then? With the biblical titles, you got a Deuteronomy?
I have a title. No, Leviticus. I have a title.
Okay.
Leviticus Jones. I have a title. I just don't have a story yet. It's going to be 5 more years.
I'm writing the next Topher Davis for next year, and it's I won't tell you. We don't have time. I'll tell you next time about it.
Do you have a title yet?
I do have a title, but if I tell you the title, I'll have to explain it. We don't have time.
Oh, okay. You can't. Okay.
We have time.
Well, you have time to tell us the title.
Well, title, yeah, but it won't mean anything to you. It's called The Burning of Russell City.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of it's a different kind of title.
It's a different
from the other two.
But it's really fast. What it's about was there was a community here in the East Bay that sprung up after the Second World War called Russell City. and it was unincorporated, and it's the only place they let African Americans and Latinos live. But the place was completely run down because of the fact that it had the county wouldn't give them infrastructure. They had no sidewalks, they had no running water, no indoor plumbing, electricity most places, no police department, no fire department. Whereas all around them were suburbs, but this place is the only place that Black people could live. And so what happened is that and I found out in research that this happened all across the country in the 50s and the 60s into the 70s, where they would a major city or county would let an area like a Russell City run down, and it's run down because you're not giving them what they need to be a sustainable place, and then they say it's blighted. They declare it blighted, meaning it's a slum, and then they take the property from the people.
Yeah, the developers come in.
Sell it to white developers who make millions and millions of dollars off that.
Yeah, and it's gentrified after that.
It's gentrified after that, and that's with Russell City. But Russell City, the people fought back, and so they burned them out. They burned them out. So what this story is, it's this Topher Davis story is he's got to go back and try to solve these fires because they never found out who did it. In real life, they never found out who the arsonist was. But he is going to go back to try to clear a man of murder who has been in prison since 1963 for killing his wife and baby and burning the house down. He's one of the people who was fighting back against them taking the city away through eminent domain. So that's what the title is. So
so you actually found a real case, and then you're writing the story with Topher around that.
Well, no, the case itself, I mean, what's real about this is that Russell City existed. This is how the people were treated. These are the services they didn't have. This is how how the county stole their homes and land from them for pennies and sold it for millions. And it happened in Mill Valley, by Chicago, where they did the same thing. Mill Valley was the same kind of community. They call it blighted. They pay a couple of $100, a couple $1,000 a home, take it, sell it to white developers. Chavez Ravine in Los Angeles was the same kind of an area, except that was Latino. And they do the same thing. They call it blighted. And it's a slum because you made it a slum.
By withdrawing any resources.
That's right, none, exactly. And so that's what this book, that's what's in the background. It's just kind of a history lesson about, because most people didn't know this stuff went on. And it's another reason why we don't have Black generational wealth, because it comes primarily from, your parents have a house, they pass on, and they leave it to you and your siblings. Well, these people were given $2,000 for each house in Russell City, $2,000, take it or leave it. And if those homes existed today in that area, they'd be worth over $1 million each. Easy with the real estate market here. So there's no generational wealth. $2,000, take it or leave it.
Yeah, most people's unless you're extremely wealthy, but your average person, your wealth is built in the equity of your home.
That's right.
And that's really what you have to pass on to your children. Hopefully you've paid it off. You paid your mortgage and you own the home free and clear. And that's money that you can pass on. And hopefully your children take care of the property, because sometimes that doesn't happen.
Yeah, well,
that's a whole nother story.
It gets sold, and they start fighting over the money, and
yes,
good problems to have. Good problems to have. And
that's true.
Nobody's ever died and left me anything. Nothing. Ever. So I told my kids they better not complain about what they get. They better not be fighting over it, because nobody ever left me anything.
Yeah, well, this has been a great conversation about all kinds of things, including your book. So, and your books that you do, and you've had a very amazing career, just starting as a stand-up comic, and then getting into journalism and TV and theater and all that.
And I got my movie. By the way, the three things that I said I wanted to do when I decided I wanted to write thrillers was, the first was the one-man show, and that was Not a Genuine Black Man. And because of the attention that Not a Genuine Black Man got, I got my first movie, which was The Bucket List. I play Morgan Freeman's youngest son in the Bucket List.
I haven't seen the Bucket List. And now
Oh,
you're gonna make me go watch it.
You got to see it. And people always talk about, well, that's on my bucket list. Well, that phrase did not exist before the movie. The screenwriter made that phrase up, and that's where it comes
Really?
from.
As I use it, I have things on my bucket list.
Everybody uses, because the three things that I wrote down that I was going to do today would be called a bucket list, but that phrase did not exist. The
Before the movie.
screenwriter made it up.
So how big a role did you have? Like
a lot bigger than the one that ended up on the screen. I mean, all the family scenes that there was Morgan Freeman had two sons. His character has two sons and a daughter and a wife. And, we had like 3 or 4 scenes. One, we were on the set of Jeopardy with Alex Trebek and all of this stuff. All got cut. So you end up seeing me in like 3 or 4 scenes, and I got like 5th or 6th billing, in the movie. And then the second one, I've done 3. The second one I did was a Marvel movie. It was Venom 2, the second one, Let There Be Carnage, with Woody Harrelson and Tom Hardy. And then I do have a bigger part. I play a reporter in it, but I have a bigger part in that one. And then Rob Reiner just put me in the sequel to This Is Spinal Tap, which will be out in the fall. And I went to New Orleans to shoot that. We shot that in New Orleans. I was thinking about that. You were saying that's where you read Outraged.
Yes, it was already. Wow. Okay. Well, congratulations on this. It's good to do the things that you wanted to do.
Yeah.
The things that you set out, you have a list of things that you want to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, a lot of people don't start working on them. They just kind of have the list and they don't pursue it. They don't execute. You have to execute. You have to actually intentionally get started with
and you have to know where it is that you want to go. You have to have
yes, it needs to be somewhat specific.
A definite major purpose is what Napoleon Hill called it. You know exactly this is what I want to do. So now I got to find 3 new things.
Well, or you just keep writing these sequels.
So that's gonna happen. As long as you guys buy them, I'll write them.
Okay. Well, Brian, it was great. You've been a great guest. Thank you for being willing to extend the time. And got to know a lot more about you. The audience has. And so that's really probably me too. They didn't know some of this stuff. I never mentioned a couple of the things that I mentioned. I've never mentioned before out loud. I don't know if the part about us being in a Jewish neighborhood. Some things you don't think about for like it's been years since you thought about something that happened in the past. I hadn't thought about that.
By the way, that's a book.
That
is a book.
Okay. All right.
There's a story there somewhere. There's a story there.
Okay.
I think, my personal opinion based on the stuff that I read, I think that's a book.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I have enough information to fill a whole book.
Just put me in the acknowledgments. Okay. Just say Brian Copeland told me to do. Just put me in the acknowledgments.
It could be a children's book.
It could.
That's a short story.
Yeah, it could. It depends on what you do with it.
Yeah. And I have children's books. Most of my book, I have 6 children's books. So I have 2 novels. I have 6 children's books, and the rest are nonfiction. So I have a combination of books.
I want to check out your children's books. How old? What age range?
5 to 10 in there. And one's a series called Kids Biz. It teaches children how to be entrepreneurs.
Oh, that's great.
And that's a 5-book series. And then I have one book called Boss Women. It's for children. It's actually 7. It's biographies of 7 African-American women who built their businesses from the ground up. But it's in rhyme form. It's in poetry form.
I want a 3-year-old granddaughter. We buy a lot of books like that for, and she loves.
Okay.
And so I'm going to look up your series because it's there's so many great children's books that are being written right now especially for African American girls. I'm shocked by how many books we've been able to find that are by and about African American girls. So it's because there wasn't, that wasn't when you and I were kids. We couldn't find that stuff anywhere.
No, we didn't. But I was an avid reader, but I just read everything. And I didn't really start getting into Black books until I was like middle school. And, I was reading adult books then. interesting stuff. Iceberg Slim and stuff like that. So anyway, have a great night, Brian.
All right, Chichi, thanks for having me. Hopefully I'll see you next year.
Yeah. Well,
see this book finished.
yeah. Once I find out your release date, I'll be in touch with Entice.
Okay. If I can mention too, if anybody wants just more information on all the stuff that I've done, or live performances I got coming up, or I've got a couple other books that are based on some of my other one-man plays, just go to briancopeland.com and it's all there.
Okay.
And write-ups and TV clips and all that stuff. It's all there. briancopeland.com.
Okay, so you got your name.
I got mine
not everybody can. I got mine too, though.
I got mine in 2002. I got mine.
Okay, yeah, I've had mine a long time. So yeah, it's important to have your name.com. So anyway, thanks so much. I am going to get the book, and I will send you a review and a note. I will let you know.
Oh, thank you.
About how much I enjoy it.
Okay, and if you don't like it, don't write me.
No, I won't.
I don't hear from it if you don't like it.
Yeah, I won't, because I don't. That's what I said. If I don't, I keep it to myself. So
you don't have anything good to say.
Right. I don't post negative reviews. Unless a book is like overhyped to the point where I can't believe they hyped this book, and I bought it and I read it and it was terrible. Then I'll leave a negative review.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It happens. Okay. Well, again, thanks for being on the show, and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Okay. Well, our final guest never signed on, and I don't have anything else to say. So I am going to end the show early this week. We have an amazing lineup for next Tuesday. And then May 13th, 2 weeks from tonight, is the Black Authors Matter TV Awards. And so I'm going to sign off and say good night. And we'll see you all next Tuesday on another episode of Black Authors Matter TV. I don't have my outro because I'm closing early, but that's okay. We've never done this, but we had someone not show. And then we had the last person didn't sign on. I don't have anything else left to say. So I'm going to say good night to everybody, and I'll see you next Tuesday on another episode of the show. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in, and join us next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for another edition of Black Authors Matter TV.